Think about the moment you realized you were becoming an adult. Not a specific day, not a single memory, just a slow, confusing drift. 1 year, you were a kid. A few years later, you were supposed to be an adult. And somewhere in between, you were just lost, trying to figure out who you were, what you were supposed to do, what was expected of you. We call it growing up. We treat it like it's natural, like it's always been this way. But here's the thing. For 99% of human history, that experience didn't exist. There were no teenage years, no identity crisis, no decade of figuring yourself out in the dark. You were a child. And then, in a single moment, sometimes in a single night, you weren't. What happened in that moment, why we abandoned it, and what we lost when we did, changes everything we think we know about identity, purpose, and what growing up is actually supposed to feel like. Let's start with something that will make you question everything. In 1960, a French historian named Philippe Ariès published a book called Centuries of Childhood. His conclusion shocked the academic world. Childhood, as we know it today, didn't exist before the 17th century. Not as a concept, not as a protected phase of life, not as a category fundamentally separate from adulthood. Ariès studied medieval European paintings, hundreds of them, spanning centuries, and he noticed something strange. Every time a child appeared in a painting, they looked like a small adult. Adult proportions, adult faces, adult clothing, adult postures. Not because medieval artists couldn't paint children accurately. They could paint everything else with extraordinary precision, but because they didn't see children as fundamentally different from adults. From roughly age 6 or 7, children in medieval Europe entered the adult world completely. They wore adult clothing. They worked adult jobs. They participated in adult conversations, adult decisions, adult consequences. There was no protected space, no separate category, no special treatment. The idea that children need years to simply discover themselves, that they deserve a long sheltered phase before the world makes demands of them, simply didn't exist. And for hunter-gatherers, the people who represent the vast majority of our species' entire existence, the transition was even more immediate than that. Hunter-gatherer children began contributing to their group by age 4 or 5. Not playing at contributing, actually contributing. By 5, they were gathering berries, insects, and small plants. By 8, they were processing food, carrying supplies, learning every animal track and edible route across miles of territory they would need to survive. Anthropologists studying the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last groups still living as our ancestors did, found that children contributed meaningfully to the group's food supply from the moment they were physically capable of doing so. But here's what matters most. They weren't doing this because adults forced them. They were doing this because they had a role. A real one. A visible one. An irreplaceable one. From the moment they could walk steadily, they were part of something that needed them. That sense of mattering, of being genuinely necessary, is something most modern adults spend their entire lives searching for. Ancient children had it at age 5. But the thing that separated ancient childhood from adulthood was not gradual. It was not a slow drift, not a confusing decade, not a diploma at the end of 12 years of sitting in a room. It was a single, deliberate, often terrifying moment, a ritual. And here's what's extraordinary about that. Every ancient culture ever studied, across every continent, every climate, every language group, independently developed some version of the same thing. A specific moment. A before and after that could not be undone. An event that permanently separated who you were from who you would be for the rest of your life. For hunter-gatherer boys, it was often the first kill. Not just any kill. A significant animal, a difficult hunt, completed alone or nearly alone, without the safety net of the men who had guided you until that day. The moment you returned with meat, everything changed. How the group spoke to you, where you sat around the fire, what decisions you were included in. You had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. For girls, The transition was tied to first menstruation, marked across most ancient cultures with ceremony, celebration, and an immediate shift in social standing. Some rituals were designed to push the body to its limit. The Satir Ma people of the Amazon require young men to wear gloves woven with bullet ants, whose sting is described as the single most painful insect sting on Earth, for 10 full minutes, without flinching, without breaking. This is not done once. It is done 20 times over months before manhood is fully recognized. The Spartans took boys from their mothers at age 7, put them through years of deliberate hunger, physical hardship, and open competition, not to be cruel, to build something that couldn't be faked. These rituals weren't just ceremonies, they were technology, ancient psychological technology designed to answer the one question every human being desperately needs answered before they can function as an adult. Who am I? The ritual answered it in a single moment. Before it, a child. After it, a man, a woman, a hunter, a member, a person with a defined, unambiguous place in the world. No wondering, no confusion, no decade of searching. The answer was carved into you by the experience itself. Now ask yourself something. When did we replace that technology? The answer, and this is the part that should genuinely disturb you, is barely over 100 years ago. In 1904, an American psychologist named G. Stanley Hall published a 2-volume work and introduced a word that had never existed in the English language before that moment: adolescence. Hall invented the concept of a distinct developmental stage between child and adult, a period of, his exact words, storm and stress, that required protection, supervision, and years of patient waiting. Before 1904, that word did not exist. Before 1904, you were a child, and then you weren't. But Hall was responding to something real. The Industrial Revolution had pulled children out of fields and into factories. Child labor laws were being passed. Public schools were being built. Society was changing faster than its rituals could keep pace with. And so we built a new structure. Childhood was extended. Schools replaced the hunt. Graduation replaced the ritual. A certificate at the end of 12 years replaced the first kill. But something didn't transfer. The ancient ritual gave you a moment you could point to. A before and an after that was undeniable. You had endured something real, proved something specific. And because of that, you knew, not because someone told you, but because you had lived through evidence, that you were capable. Modern adolescence gives you a decade of ambiguity instead. And here's the science behind why that distinction matters far more than we realize. The human prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, consequence understanding, and the formation of identity, does not fully develop until age 25. Ancient humans were hunting, leading, raising children, and making life or death decisions with a prefrontal cortex that modern neuroscience would classify as still in development. So were we, until very recently. For most of human history, this wasn't a problem, because the ritual, the community, and the clearly defined role absorbed what the individual brain couldn't yet process alone. The group was the scaffolding the developing brain was supposed to lean against. Now we've dismantled the ritual, dissolved the clear role, extended the ambiguity by 15 years, and left individuals alone with a developing brain, a screen, and no ceremony to mark the moment they've arrived. The result is a generation that reaches their 30s still asking the question ancient 10-year-olds had already answered. Who am I? For 99% of human history, children didn't spend years wondering who they were. They knew. Not because it was easy, not because childhood was painless, but because their community handed them a mirror, one specific, unforgettable, irreversible moment, and said, "Look, this is you now. This is what you survived. This is who you are." We looked at those rituals and decided they were too harsh, too sudden, too much for a young person to carry. So we built something gentler, something longer, more protected, more carefully managed, something that removed the terror, but also removed the clarity, and we called it growing up. The question nobody has answered yet, the one ancient cultures never had to ask, is whether we built something better, or whether we just built something longer.